Welcome back, young scholars. We have a special guest here today for our discussion of how to do a short answer question, and that is the one, the only, Miss Judith Dixon.
Thank you, Jason Schumann, the man, the myth, the legend. So one thing that you really need to master over this academic year is how to write an SAQ, and that is a really important component of the AP test. So you have unit SAQs that you have to complete. So we wanted to give you a lesson on how to write an SAQ effectively. So the first question is, what is an SAQ? And we obviously know that that's a short answer question. And in that short answer response, you need to make sure that you are
answering the question. Above everything else is about answering the question.
And it's not a huge essay. You'll be relieved to hear that. However, if you're not writing a huge essay, you're also not making a bullet point answer. You need to answer the prompt in complete sentences always with evidence and no blah responses because you're going to get 0 points.
Bullet points do not count. So if you have anything less than a complete sentence, they will not score it. You will get a 0. So do not write in bullet points. You must write in complete sentences.
And you know that everything that we do in AP World History is in preparation for that AP test in May. 20% of the total AP score is based on SAQs. So it's very important that you practice those throughout the year.
On the homework that you're assigned, you'll be given a chapter, so you read through that chapter first. That's always the most critical thing, is you read first. Then you go through and answer those SAQ questions, hopefully with the knowledge that you've gleaned from both reading the textbook and listening in class and doing some of the discussions and activities.
So the first question is, what does an SAQ look like? There are 4 SAQs, and there are 2 required questions. You get to choose between questions 3 and 4, and
each SAQ has 3 subparts. So question 1 will have subpart A, B, C, and so forth. And so each of these subparts are graded separately. You can get 1 point for each subpart, but you should approach them as related, but ultimately to answer them separately. So here is what the booklet that you'll receive from the College Board will look like as you provide your answers to the SAQs. Note the giant Q1, Q2, Q3, or Q4, because you get a choice between questions 3 or 4, because you have to write your answer in response to each question on the correct page. A couple other little things. 1, you must write inside the box. It does not count. And what you do is you're writing with a pen. Sometimes you make a mistake. You want to add some stuff. You can't do it outside the box. It must be inside the box. You do want to do each part separately. However, it's okay if you find that one of the answers to your question is maybe what you wish that you had written in response to another question. Do not freak out. Do not try and rewrite it.
So overlap is okay.
Overlap is okay. Let's say you answer question 1A and you then read question 1B and you're like, oh, the answer to question 1B is what I just wrote for 1A. They will count it regardless of how you've labeled it. So that's why you should label it to keep it easier for the graders, but do not worry if you overlap. So here's what your answer will look like. It'll be complete sentences, blah, 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 blah. So you want to answer each subpart separately. And then again, use complete sentences.
Okay. For your SAQs, you will have 3 questions. You will have 3 questions with 3 parts. That means you have 9 things to do over a period of 40 minutes, which, if you do math, that means you have 4 minutes and 26 seconds per part. That means you need to be organized and moving through all 3 questions total in 13 minutes and 20 seconds per question.
So as you practice, you want to try and do those subparts in about 4 minutes each, or each question in about 12 to 13 minutes each.
I also think that it's important that you recognize at first it's going to take you a little longer. And then over time, you're going to get better. And you're going to be excellent at spiraling your information and getting it all out on paper.
So on these SAQ questions, they become more difficult as you progress from A to B to C. So part A requires a fairly simple answer. You can probably answer it in about 2 quality sentences. And the verb, that's the prompt, will most likely start with the word identify. So they just want you to identify to provide some historical evidence.
Okay, with part B, that's where you're going to get to a little bit more nuts and bolts. You're going to describe or explain what you know about the prompt in 3 to 5 sentences. So explain, give me some facts.
So part C will probably ask for a higher level of analysis. It may ask you to compare things that you know from the prompt with something that's maybe related. So this oftentimes requires a little bit more in-depth analysis and a little bit longer of a response. So general rule of thumb, 4 to 6 sentences will probably satisfy an answer.
So, Mr. Schumann, I have a question. That means a short answer question, an SAQ, can be approximately 12 sentences.
Correct. Your answer needs to fit within that box. It can't be more than that box. So do not practice writing more than, 12 to 15 sentences responses for the SAQs.
For the SAQs. Okay.
All right.
You're going to ace that SAQ.
And here's how. You're going to have a strategy going into it. So this ACE strategy involves 3 parts. Answering the question, which is going to be what you're going to do in the first sentence. And a good rule of thumb that kind of moves you along is just taking that prompt and flipping it.
What do you mean by flip?
So you take the words of the prompt, which are formatted in a question, and you take it and you turn it into an assertion.
That you're going to write out.
Which we'll show you in a second how to do this.
And then the second thing you need to do is you need to cite specific evidence.
You'll either be given some sort of source in the prompt, in which case you need to utilize the secondary source or the primary source, or maybe they're asking for outside information or outside knowledge
that you've gleaned through AP World History throughout the year. And finally, you're going to explain.
And you explain by stating how your evidence ultimately proves your assertion. So using words like because is a critical word when you're doing explanation. So we'll look at some examples right now. So what we want you to do next is to read through this example SAQ. Take a couple minutes, read through, pause the video, and answer the questions, and then we'll come back and discuss in a second. All right, what we're going to do next is we're going to go through each of these questions and each of these subparts individually. So this first question asks us to identify one way in which the source reflects a continuity in the relations between pastoral groups and the Chinese in the period 600 BCE to 600 CE. So you'll note, first of all, the verb that starts this prompt is identify. And so one way that we identify is we start with that answering the question. We're going to flip the prompt. So here's a possible answer. One way this source reflects a continuity in the relations between pastoral groups and the Chinese is that it describes the ongoing conflict between these two societies. So notice how we just took that prompt, flipped it around, and made it into an assertion. What do we have to do next, Ms. Dixon?
Next, we need to cite the evidence.
And so here we see the source describes how the Xiongnu plunder and raid Chinese villages. Notice I took a very short quote from the passage in which I'm citing evidence from, in this case, this primary source. So whenever you quote as this way of source citing evidence, only, maybe 3 to 5 words max. Notice how we're also, though, including some outside evidence. So throughout this period, the Chinese built defensive walls on their northern border to protect themselves from these raids. If you can, provide outside evidence as well and go for it. You can't get any points off in AP World History for writing things that are historically inaccurate or wrong. So this is an area where you just back the truck up and dump as much knowledge, hoping that some of it is correct.
Within your
Time.
1 page and time limit.
So notice in this particular case, because the question only states identify, you really don't need to go to that next step and explain. So for subpart A, it's probably unnecessary to explain just as long as you've answered the question and cited evidence. All right, so question 1B asks us to explain one change not specifically mentioned in the passage that resulted from contact between pastoral groups like the Xiongnu and settled societies like the Chinese in the period prior to 600 BCE. So for this question, we need to, again, answer the question. We need to flip that prompt. And we could do that by answering like one change that resulted from the contact between pastoral groups and settled societies was the spread of technology. What do we do next, Ms. Dixon?
Well, now I need some evidence, and I'm going to have lots of evidence from class and from your readings.
And this particular piece of evidence is drawn directly from the outline. So it talks about, in the outline, how pastoral groups were responsible for spreading technology like chariots and iron weapons. But then ultimately we also, in this case, have to explain it because the prompt asks us to explain. So here's how we do this. We connect our answer to the prompt. So this changed settled societies because, notice that word because, really important when you're explaining, they were able to use these technologies in their own subsequent military conquests. So we're providing a little bit more in-depth analysis. All right, so for part 1C, explain one limitation of this account as a source of information about the Xiongnu. So when we're answering this question, again, we want to use our ACE strategy. We're going to start by answering the question. So one limitation of this account as a source of information is that the author may be expressing his bias toward the genre. It's not enough just to say this author is biased. You have to then take it to the next level and cite some evidence of that bias, which in this case is contained in the passage. So for example, he describes the genre as uncivilized barbarians who know nothing of proper behavior. Notice again, I'm quoting, but I'm not using long quotes, just 3 to 5 words that we're quoting to support our answer. Then we have to explain. And this is the critical part when they ask you to explain. And here we're explaining why there is some bias. Well, first of all, we have to make note that he is a Han Chinese historian. Another possible source of bias, which the genre were constantly attacking the Han, and therefore he is going to treat the Han as an enemy, and he's going to be affected by his dislike for them, and that's going to explain the possible bias here, and also the limitation of this source as information about the genre. So that's our video on how to do an SAQ. Do not hesitate to come in for help during advisory, before school, after school, because these will be difficult.
And both of us will be in advisory together. So I think that that's going to be a really effective way to work through a lot of these questions that you have.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Dixon.
All right.
See you guys.
Thanks, Mr. Schumann.